Bureaucrats have to be ready for anything. Hey, I am Chuck the Bureaucrat, and today I want to talk a little bit about emergency preparedness with an emphasis on go bags. I don't know, sometimes you hear people call these bug out bags. In fact, I'm going to talk about two different types of go bags. The one you keep in your office and the one you keep in your car. And as we think about this, I want you to put yourself in a risk assessment state of mind. That is, what's the likelihood that something will happen and what's the severity if it does. The reason I make this point about risk assessment is I have seen a lot of people over-prepare for situations that are incredibly unlikely to happen. And meanwhile, they don't do any preparation for things that, well, they're going to happen and it's just a matter of time. Okay, the other thing that I'm going to recommend is that we think about a go bag in three parts. Well, there's a fourth one, but I'll get to that later. Those three parts are clothing, food, and gear. All right, let's do the office go bag first. And as far as I can tell, there's three situations you really need to be prepared for. First is that you're in the wrong uniform. So that only involves clothing, no food or gear. I don't know, maybe there's some group PT or a PT test. That one's pretty easy to deal with. You just stick a top and a bottom, some socks and sneakers in your bag. Maybe you unexpectedly need to be in your dress uniform. That one can be more problematic, and it's tough to keep a spare uniform at work unless you have one of those high visibility jobs. The good news is that for most rank and file, you have some warning before you have to put on your fancy uniform. The second situation is when your spouse unexpectedly announces that you have to go to an event after work where you can't just wear your uniform. Again, this one has a clothing-only solution. Put a long-sleeve button-down shirt, some khakis, a brown belt, some brown hiking shoes, and a white t-shirt in your bag. Now, you might be thinking, well, why wouldn't I just have my wife bring those clothes to the event? Well, A, we're building a go bag that's designed to cover a wide range of scenarios. So if you have these things, you can improvise. And B, at least twice in the last 15 years, I left important elements of my uniform at a restaurant because I was changing in some back room. Once it was a pair of boots, another time it was a beret, and it was a pain to get them back, so change at the office. The third situation where you need an office go bag is you're working unexpectedly late. Here, clothing doesn't matter as much, but food and gear do. As far as food, you want about 1 MRE's worth of food. And I know what you're thinking. The Pentagon is like a small city, so there's always a place to get food. It's more like a small town that rolls up the sidewalks as the sun goes down. Most restaurants are closed by 2 or 3 p.m., although by contract there is one restaurant that stays open 24 hours, if you can figure out which one it is. And yes, there are tons of vending machines, but if that is part of your strategy, I'd recommend putting a bunch of $1 bills in your go bag. The other thing to understand about people when they're working late is they tend to do this thing where they're like, just 20 more minutes, just 20 more minutes. And even if you accept that, oh, this is going to be a late night, if your boss is also there working late, he really doesn't like it if you go wandering off in search of food. The other thing that you might want if you're working late is a simple hygiene kit. Working shoulder to shoulder in a cramped office space is a heck of a lot easier if y'all just brush your teeth and put on a fresh layer of Old Spice. And of course, sooner or later, you're going to have to shave. Oh, and it's probably not a bad idea to throw in a change of underwear and a towel. The other thing I like to keep in my office go kit is a small assortment of office supplies. Pens, Post-its, index cards. Sometimes you have to go off-site unexpectedly, and it's handy to have a little office already packed up. All right, so that is your office. Now let's talk about your car. And again, I'm going to go clothes, food, gear. Now, the two big situations where you'll get into trouble in your car are when you have a breakdown or you get stuck in traffic. You want a rule of thumb? This never happens in nice weather. Therefore, the first thing I put in my kit is a change of civilian clothes that's more in the line of jeans and a sweatshirt. Sure, you might not need to change, but it's nice to have an option that's warm and dry. Speaking of warm and dry, you're going to want a raincoat and some wet weather boots. I always kept a big old secondhand trench coat in my car kit. That really keeps the rain off, and then I had a pair of knee-high galoshes. One obvious thing that, quite frankly, I never had much use for was an umbrella. In a driving rain, an umbrella is pretty useless, and you have to occupy one hand just to hold it. Okay, that is clothing for the car, and now we want to think about food. And the real reason that you need food is in case you get stuck in traffic. Basically, any non-perishable food will do. I'm a big fan of nuts and those little suspiciously orange crackers. And keep in mind, you should pack enough to share. If you're slugging, you might have folks in the car. If you're traveling with your family, more mouths to feed. And even if it's just you, the folks in the cars around you are probably not as prepared as you are. You also want a couple cheap bottles of water. I like these because they can freeze and thaw, and there's no real negative effect. Now, let's talk about gear. If you're going to be stuck in your car for hours, you want your passengers to be able to keep their devices charged. So, a couple cheap charging cables, those come in handy. An emergency blanket or a tarp can be useful, and then a decent length of rope. Oh, and jumper cables. You have no idea how many people do not have these things. And you're going to need them a lot more than you realize. And then the last piece of gear that I really like is a manual fuel transfer siphon pump. If you run out of gas on I-95, you can be a long way from a gas station. And it's not like you can carry a gallon of gas in the backseat of your car. But everybody driving past you has gas that you could use if you could just get to it. So a manual siphon pump can save the day. Now, at the beginning, I said that I would cover clothing, food, gear, and there was a fourth thing to consider: physical security, some kind of weapon. Here, I like to think in terms of a tool that doubles as a security device. For the car, I like gardening tools, like an axe or a hatchet or a machete, something that you could use to clear a tree out of the road if you had to. In the office, you gotta be a little more low profile. I lean towards a good sturdy pair of scissors, especially those older ones that are all metal, maybe a letter opener or a good fist-sized paperweight. Hey, just a quick addendum. I've had some people ask, why wouldn't you have a handgun? And let's be honest, when we're talking about an emergency go bag, one that's in your car or one that's in the Pentagon, the fact of the matter is, a firearm comes with way too many liabilities. Registration, if somebody searches your vehicle, you don't want to end up with your hands behind your head on the curb. But nobody's going to look twice at a pink T-ball bat. Nobody looks twice at these kinds of tools, but having them means you are never really unarmed. Now, you guys probably know some things that I forgot, so put your thoughts in the comments. And in the meantime, watch this video.